On my third week as a management trainee, my department manager took me aside after a client meeting. He told me that attractive women moved up quickly in this company once they understood how leadership really worked. He said it like a compliment. He said it like a door quietly opening. He had no idea I was the CEO's daughter. I had joined my father's company under my mother's maiden name. Not because I wanted a shortcut, because I wanted the exact opposite. I wanted to know how ordinary employees were treated when nobody important was watching. I wanted to see the company my father could not see. Within 6 weeks, I learned that 7 women had made complaints about the same manager. 7 women. And not one of those complaints had ever reached my father's desk. And just as I got ready to expose him, I found a photograph on the desk of my father's secretary. A family photo. The manager who had been circling me for weeks was standing in it, smiling with his arm around her. He was her older brother. That was the moment I understood something that changed everything. I was not dealing with one predator. I was dealing with a machine. A quiet, patient machine built for a single purpose. To make sure my father never heard the truth. My name is Ava, and this is the story of the 6 weeks that taught me what a company really is. Before we go on, I want to ask you something. If you believe that every single person deserves to be heard, no matter who they know or who they are, then you belong here. This is Office Storylines, where we tell the true-to-life stories of the people who get overlooked, underestimated, and told to stay quiet and the moment they decide not to. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because in this story, a young woman is about to learn that being right is not the same as being safe, and you are going to want to see how she survives that lesson. Now let me take you back to my first day. Let me tell you how I ended up there. I am 26 years old. I spent 4 years studying business administration in London, and when I came home to the States, I thought I already understood how companies worked. I had read the books, I had done the case studies, I had the easy confidence of someone who had never actually been powerless in her life. My father is Richard Hart. He is the chief executive of the Hartwell Group, a financial consulting firm my parents built together more than 20 years ago. Before he would let me anywhere near the executive floor, he made me a deal. Spend 6 months in the lower departments, learn the culture from the bottom, understand the company before you try to lead it. I thought that was fair. I also thought it would be simple. To make sure no one treated me differently, I did not use my father's name. I used my mother's maiden name instead. I walked into Hartwell as Ava Bennett, management trainee. Only 3 people in the entire building knew who I really was. My father, my mother, and the chair of the board. Everyone else saw a young woman with a decent resume and no connections at all. That was exactly what I wanted them to see. My first day did not feel special, and that was the whole point. There was no private office. No one shook my hand and told me I was going to do great things. I was handed a login, a stack of data entry, and a list of clients to call. Before lunch, a senior associate asked me to refill the coffee for a meeting I was not invited to attend. I remember standing at that coffee machine, watching it drip, feeling completely invisible. And then 2 managers walked past me and they started talking about the Hart family, about my father. They said he was out of touch. They said he had no idea what actually happened on the floors beneath him. One of them laughed and said the old man thinks this place runs on values. They said it right in front of me, because to them, I was no one. I was a girl with a coffee pot. And here's the strange thing. I was not angry. I was fascinated. For the first time in my life, I was seeing my father's company the way it truly was. Not the version he stood in front of at the annual meeting, not the version in the glossy brochure, the version that existed when he was not in the room. My father thought he was sending me into his company to learn how employees worked. The truth is, he had sent me in to learn how they were treated when he was not there to protect them. In those first days, I saw 100 small things that would never appear in any report. I saw a manager take credit for a junior analyst's work in front of a client, while the analyst sat right there and said nothing, because saying something was not safe. I saw people laugh a little too hard at a senior partner's bad jokes. I saw who got interrupted in meetings and who did the interrupting, and how reliably those 2 groups broke down along the very same lines. None of it broke a single rule. That was what struck me the most. A company can follow every policy in the handbook and still teach its youngest, most vulnerable people one clear lesson: that your comfort matters less than the comfort of whoever stands above you. That if something is wrong, the safest thing you can do is pretend you did not notice it. I had grown up hearing my father talk about the family we had built at Hartwell. I believed him. He believed himself, but he had only ever seen the company from the top where everyone smiles up at you. He had never once stood at the bottom and watched them smile because they were afraid. I was placed in the sales division. That division was run by a man named Adrian Cross, and on paper, Adrian was flawless. He had the highest numbers in the region year after year. He called himself a mentor to young talent, and the leadership team believed him completely. My father had praised Adrian by name for years in front of the whole company, and most importantly, Adrian was one of the managers who decided who passed their probation and who did not. In our department, if you wanted to keep your job, Adrian had to sign off on you. Your future ran through his hands. Adrian was 43 years old and he was married. He was charming and in a way that worked on almost everyone. He remembered your birthday. He asked about your weekend. He made you feel for just a moment like the most important person in the building, and then he made you feel like you owed him for it. He noticed me in my very first week. At first, it was small things you could explain away if you wanted to. In a team meeting, he complimented how I looked in front of everyone. He told the room I had the right image for our clients. He offered to mentor me personally, one-on-one. He started scheduling our check-in meetings for after 6 in the evening when most of the floor had already gone home. He asked about my personal life. Did I have a boyfriend? What did I do on the weekends? Who did I live with? Each one of those things on its own could be called friendly. That is the trick. That is exactly how it works. Not a single moment is ever bad enough by itself to point at. He built his behaviour out of things that all had an innocent explanation. But there was another trainee in my group. Her name was Nina Foster. Nina was 24, quiet and careful, and she had been at Hartwell a few months longer than me. One afternoon, after Adrian offered again to give me private guidance, Nina waited until we were alone by the elevators. She said something I have never been able to forget. She said, "He does not mentor all the new hires. He only mentors the ones who look like us." I asked her what she meant. She would not look at me. She stared at the elevator doors and said, "You will see." And then the doors slid open and she was gone. That night, I could not stop hearing it. He only mentors the ones who look like us. A few days later, I found Nina alone in the break room staring into a cup of tea she was not drinking. I sat down across from her. I told her I had been thinking about what she said. She looked at me for a long moment, like she was deciding whether I was safe. Then she told me a little, not everything, just enough. She said that in her first month, Adrian had been wonderful, warm, encouraging. He told her she reminded him of himself at that age. He gave her his best clients. He told her she had a real future. And then, slowly, the price of all that warmth became clear. The late meetings, the comments about what she wore, the dinner invitations that were not really invitations, because you could feel exactly what would happen to your career if you said no. She said she had said no, and she said that after she did, she watched everything he had given her get taken away, one piece at a time. Her clients, her good reviews, her standing. Until she was clinging to a job she used to be great at, being told every week that she was underperforming. She said, "The worst part is not what he does. The worst part is that afterward, you start to wonder if you imagined the whole thing, because every single thing he did has a nice, clean explanation, and there is no one you can tell who does not already work for him." I asked her why she had never reported it. She laughed, but there was no humour in it at all. She said, "Report it to who? The complaints go up, and then they come right back down and land on his desk. And then you are the difficult one. And you still need the paycheck." I did not know yet how completely right she was, but I filed away every word, so I started looking. Quietly, I had access to the basic personnel directory as part of my training tasks, and I began pulling the history of our department. Who had joined, who had left, and when. What I found stopped me cold. Over the past 3 years, 11 young women had come through Adrian's department. 11. And 7 of them had left within their first year. 5 of those had exit files that said the same thing in almost the same words, not a culture fit, and 3 of them had been rated highly in their first months, praised in writing, and then, suddenly, their reviews collapsed. Strong, 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 and then a sharp fall, and then nothing, then gone. I told myself there could be reasons. People leave jobs all the time. People underperform. But 11 women and always the same shape to the story. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. And once you see a pattern, you cannot unsee it. Then I found Emily Ross. Emily had worked in our department 2 years earlier. Her early reviews were excellent, and then in her file there was a single note. She had raised a concern with human resources. 2 weeks after that note, she was gone. I dug deeper. In an archived email thread, I found a message Emily had sent. It was short. It said, "I am requesting a confidential meeting with the chief executive." The email had been forwarded once, to an internal address, and then the thread simply ended. No reply, no meeting record, nothing at all to show that my father had ever seen a single word of it. I sat there staring at that screen for a long time. A woman had asked to speak to my father directly, in confidence, and somewhere between her keyboard and his desk her voice had vanished. I did not know yet where it had gone, but I was beginning to understand that it had not vanished by accident. A few days later, Adrian invited me to dinner. He framed it as a career conversation. He said he wanted to talk about my future, about the management track, about where he saw me going. He said it would be more relaxed away from the office. I said no, politely. I said I would be glad to meet during working hours in the office any time he liked. Something shifted in his face. Just for a second. And then the charm slid back into place, smooth as ever. He said, "Here at Hartwell, the people who really go far learn to build relationships outside of working hours." He said it gently, like advice, like he was doing me a favour by warning me. I remember thinking, that is not advice. That is a threat wearing a very nice suit. And then the small punishments began. I was quietly dropped from a client meeting I had been preparing for all week. A new probation review appeared in my file. In it, Adrian wrote that I had not yet learned how to accept guidance, that I struggled with coachability, words that sound so reasonable on paper and mean something so ugly when you know what he was actually asking me to accept. At the same time, I watched it happen to Nina. She had turned down a private drink with him, and the next week she was handed an impossible pile of extra work with no support at all. Her best client was quietly reassigned to someone else. I understood then, completely, what Adrian's real weapon was. It was not his charm. It was not the compliments. It was our jobs. He could not force anyone to do anything, but he controlled whether we passed probation, and he had learned to use that power like a hand on the back of your neck, gently steering you exactly where he wanted you to go. Then he made his move on me directly. He called me into his office after hours. The floor was empty. He told me I had a lot going for me. He listed it out slowly, almost like he was setting a price. My appearance, my education, my confidence. And then he said the part he had clearly said before, to other women, in this same office, in this same chair. He said I did not yet know how to use those things the right way. He told me there was a management program he could put me forward for, a real opportunity, the kind that could change my whole career. And then he said that to be considered, he would need me to join him on a business trip that weekend. Just the two of us, to get to know each other better. I said no. Clearly. Out loud. No. I want to tell you exactly what he said back, because I still think about it. He looked at me, calm and almost disappointed, and he said, "Do not turn an opportunity into an accusation just because you are not mature enough to understand it. Sit with that for a second." He had built it perfectly. If I stayed quiet, he won. And if I spoke up, he had already named me first. Immature, confused. A girl who did not understand a generous man's kindness. The next morning, a new probation review appeared in my file. I had failed to meet expectations. He thought he had me. He thought I was just another young woman with no power and no protection, about to be quietly walked out the door with a file full of gentle, deniable lies. He had no idea who he was talking to. But here is the part that surprised me the most. Neither did I, not really. Because I was about to learn that being the CEO's daughter was not going to save me the way I had always assumed it would. That night, I sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time before I could drive home. My hands were shaking. Not from fear of Adrian exactly, from something bigger and colder than that. Because for the first time in my life, I understood what the women before me had felt. I had a father who ran the company. I had a name that could end this man in an afternoon, and even I, with all of that behind me, had sat in that office and felt small, had felt the trap begin to close, had felt for one horrible second the quiet pull to just go along with it, to make it easier, to survive. If I felt that with everything I had, then what did Nina feel? What had Emily felt? What had all 11 women felt? The ones with no powerful parent, no safety net. Nothing but a job they needed and a manager who held it over their heads like a blade. That was the moment this stopped being about me. And it was the moment I finally stopped being angry and started being patient. I decided it was time to use who I really was. I would go upstairs, get on my father's calendar, and tell him everything. Simple, direct. I honestly believed that the second I reached his desk, this whole nightmare would be over. I took the elevator up to the executive floor and walked to the desk that guarded his office. Behind that desk sat his secretary, a woman named Elaine. Elaine was 39, sharp, polished, and she had worked at my father's side for more than 10 years. She controlled his calendar, his mail, his messages. Nothing reached Richard Hart that did not pass through Elaine first. She asked me to wait, and while I waited, my eyes drifted across her desk. There was a framed photograph, a family photo, an older woman in the centre, Elaine on one side. And on the other side, with his arm around them both, smiling that same easy smile I knew from the sales floor, stood Adrian Cross. I felt the floor tilt under me. I kept my voice steady. I asked her as casually as I could manage who the man in the photo was. Elaine smiled warmly and said, "My older brother, he works here too." And then, before I could say another word, she told me my father's calendar was completely full. She suggested very kindly that whatever my issue was, I should raise it through my department manager, through Adrian. And in that single moment, the whole circle finally locked into place in my mind. An employee has a problem with Adrian. She files a complaint. The complaint travels up to the executive floor. It reaches Elaine. Elaine sends it right back down to local human resources or to the department manager, marked as a small internal matter. Adrian learns the name of the person who reported him before human resources has even spoken to her. That person's reviews collapse. She is quietly pushed out. And all my father ever sees at the very top is a clean file that says another employee who is simply not a good fit. I had thought all I needed to do was reach my father's desk, but the person guarding that door was the exact same person who had been locking it, quietly, for years. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to march into my father's office and blow the whole thing wide open. But I made myself stop and think it all the way through. If I confronted him directly, here is what would happen. My father would be shocked. He would want to be fair. He would call Elaine in to ask her about it. Elaine would warn Adrian within the hour. Files would be edited. Records would quietly change. And worst of all, the whole thing would become a story about a father protecting his daughter. It would stop being about 7 women. It would shrink down to one girl and her powerful dad. Adrian would survive that. He always survived, and every woman who came after me would be no safer than the women who came before. So I did not go to my father, I went to my mother. My mother is Catherine Hart. She is 52. She co-founded Hartwell with my father, and years ago she stepped back from running it day to day. But she never once stepped back from the company itself. She still holds a large share of it, and she sits on the board's ethics committee. I told her everything. The dinner, the trip, the reviews, Nina, the vanishing women, Emily Ross, the photograph, all of it. My mother did not explode. She did not cry. She did not even raise her voice. She just listened, all the way to the end. And when I was finished, she asked me one single question. She said, "Do you have evidence for what happened to you or evidence for a system?" I did not understand at first, so she explained. One inappropriate message from Adrian could ruin one man, but it could not fix anything. Adrian could be called a bad apple, apologised for, and quietly replaced by the next Adrian. If I wanted to change the company, I did not need proof of a single bad night. I needed proof of a pattern that had run for years. That was the exact moment I stopped being an angry victim and started becoming something else. A person with a plan. And I had the best possible partner in the world. A woman who had helped build this company. A woman who knew its rules better than anyone alive. And a woman who, I would soon realise, had been waiting a very long time to be certain. Later, my mother told me something I did not know. Years earlier, she had warned my father about Elaine. Not about anything specific, just a feeling. She had told him that one person should never control that much of what he saw and heard. That no leader should let a single gatekeeper decide which truths reached him and which ones did not. My father had waved it away. Elaine was loyal. Elaine was efficient. Elaine made his whole life run smoothly. Why on earth would he change that? My mother had let it go. She had no proof, only instinct, and she had learned long ago that instinct is not enough to move against a person's livelihood. So she had waited, and she had watched. For years she had felt that something was wrong on those lower floors, without ever being able to put her finger on it. And then her daughter walked into her home and named it for her. I understood, sitting there in front of her, that my mother was not going to rush. She had waited far too long to be careless now. When she finally moved, she was going to move once, and she was going to be right. My mother moved carefully and legally, and with a patience that honestly frightened me a little. Using her authority on the ethics committee, she quietly issued something called a preservation request. In plain language, that means she made sure certain things could no longer be deleted. Deleted emails, Adrian's meeting calendar, employee review files, Elaine's access logs, the record of everything Elaine had ever opened and touched, every complaint that had ever been routed to the executive office, and the full edit history of the human resources files so that we could see not just what they said now, but what they used to say before someone quietly changed them. While that silent net was being cast, I kept working. Same desk, same tasks, same polite smile on my face. I want to be very clear about something because it matters more than anything else in this story. I did not try to trap Adrian into doing something worse. I never once tried to bait him. That is not what this was about, and it was never going to be. Instead, I simply started making his usual tricks impossible to hide. I asked that every meeting be put on the calendar. After every conversation with him, I sent a short, friendly email confirming what we had discussed in writing with a timestamp on it. I never met him alone after hours again, and every single time a good client or a career opportunity was suddenly tied to some personal request, I quietly wrote it down. I will not pretend those weeks were easy. Every morning I walked into that office and smiled at a man I now understood completely. Every time he passed my desk, I felt my stomach turn over. He could tell something had changed in me. He could not name it, but he could feel it. And so the pressure got heavier. He gave me harder work with shorter deadlines. He criticized me in front of the team for things that were not my fault. He kept adding little notes to my file. He was building a case to end my time there, and he was doing it right out in the open because he was still certain no one would ever read it but him. There were nights I wanted to walk away from the whole thing, not because I doubted the truth, but because holding it inside day after day, while smiling at the man responsible, was one of the hardest things I have ever done. I kept going for one simple reason, because Nina could not quit, because Emily had not been able to fight, because every woman before me had been made to stand alone, and this time we were not alone. Nina agreed to save her own messages. She was terrified. She had a family that depended on her paycheck to survive. But when she saw that Adrian had come for me too, something in her changed. She stopped feeling crazy. She realized maybe for the first time that she had never been the problem. And my mother, working through an independent lawyer, quietly reached out to the women who had already left. Emily Ross and the others. Women who had been made to feel completely alone. Women who had signed papers and walked away, believing that no one would ever listen to them. One by one, they started to answer. The lawyer told me about one of those conversations afterward. She had called Emily Ross, the woman whose email I had found buried in the system. Emily had gone completely silent on the phone when she realized someone was finally asking, and then she had said something the lawyer wrote down word for word. She said, "For 2 years, I thought I was the only one. I thought I had done something wrong. I thought I was too sensitive, or too proud, or just not good enough for the job. Do you have any idea what it does to a person to carry that alone? And now you are telling me there were others, that it was never me at all." Emily agreed to speak to the investigation. So did the woman after her, and the one after that. Each of them had spent years believing she was a single, private failure. And each of them, the very moment she learned she was one of many, found something that had been taken from her. Not just her voice, her certainty that she had not imagined any of it. The machine that Adrian and Elaine had built was very, very good at silencing one voice at a time. It had never once had to face all of them at the same moment. The audit came back, and it was worse than I had ever imagined. Elaine had not been careless. She had been thorough. The records showed that she had personally pulled 7 complaint emails out of the flow to my father's office. 7. She had relabeled them as a department-level personnel issues, so they would sink quietly into local human resources and never rise again. She had removed requests to meet the chief executive from his calendar, so those meetings simply never existed as far as the schedule was concerned. She had notified Adrian before human resources ever interviewed the people who reported him, and she had opened the probation files of young female employees again and again, even though she held no human resources role that gave her any reason to. Worse than that, in some cases, she had written the language herself. Notes describing these women as having an attitude problem before the process that was supposed to judge them fairly had even begun. And then there was the money. The audit found that after each bonus cycle, Adrian had sent Elaine payments. They were labelled as family support. It was not quite enough on its own to prove she was being paid to keep quiet, but it was more than enough to show that these two people were not simply brother and sister. Their careers, their money, their futures were tied together in a single knot. If he fell, she fell with him, and she had spent years making absolutely sure that he never fell. I finally understood why the door to my father's office had been locked for so long. The person holding the only key had a deeply personal reason to keep it that way. Here is the part I am proudest of, because when it came time to bring Adrian down, my mother and I did not use me as bait. We did not stage some dramatic confrontation in an empty room. We never once put another woman in danger to catch him. We used his own ego. My mother let it be known through all the normal channels that the company was preparing to name a new regional vice president, a real promotion, a serious step up the ladder. Adrian believed completely and instantly that he was the obvious choice. He had the numbers, he had the years, he had the charm. Of course it would be him. Who else could it possibly be? But to be considered, every candidate had to present to a panel, and Adrian was told exactly what he would need to speak about: the culture of his department, his employee retention numbers, his record of developing female talent, his process for feedback and mentoring. He walked straight into it, smiling the whole way. And Elaine, loyal to the very end, helped him build the perfect presentation. Together they prepared his talking points. No formal complaints in 5 years, a high rate of female employees being promoted, no cases of retaliation ever, a department culture that was safe and supportive and warm. Every single word of it was a lie, and every single word of it was about to be spoken out loud, on the record, in front of the very people who already held the truth in their hands. They thought they were preparing for a promotion, they were writing a confession, and they had no idea. Adrian walked into that conference room like a man about to be crowned. My father sat at the head of the table. That surprised no one. But then Adrian noticed the others in the room. My mother was there, seated as a member of the ethics committee. Adrian had not expected her at all. His smile flickered just for an instant, and then he recovered. Elaine sat near my father, ready to run the slides for her brother exactly as they had planned it together. Adrian began. And he was good. I will give him that much. He spoke smoothly about his team, his numbers, his personal philosophy of leadership. He talked about how deeply he valued mentoring young people. He hit every point on the list. And then he said the sentence he had rehearsed. He said, "In the past 5 years, we have not received a single harassment complaint." The room went very quiet. And then my mother spoke. Her voice was calm and clear and unhurried. She said, "Not received or not forwarded?" Adrian blinked. He did not understand the question. He opened his mouth to answer, and the screen changed. Elaine's slide vanished. In its place appeared a timeline. 7 complaints laid out by date. 11 women who had left the department. Reviews that had been altered shown side by side, the before and the after in plain black and white. Emails that had been pulled out of the flow to the chief executive with Elaine's own name attached to them. After-hours meetings. And the moments marked in red when Adrian had been warned about a complaint before the person who filed it had ever been interviewed. Elaine moved fast. She reached for her keyboard to log out of the system, to close it, to make it stop. Nothing happened. Because before that meeting ever began, the technology team had quietly frozen every bit of access she had. She sat there, hitting keys that no longer answered to her, watching years of careful, quiet, patient work light up on the wall for everyone in the room to see. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was Elaine's fingers tapping uselessly against dead keys. Adrian's eyes moved across the timeline on the wall, and I watched him do the math, watched him realise how much was there, how far back it went, how carefully all of it had been kept, and then, to his credit as a survivor, he tried to turn it around. He pointed at the screen and he said this was a coordinated attack. He said someone had clearly been building this for months. He said a handful of bitter former employees and a jealous rival had cherry-picked data to destroy a man who had done nothing but hold people to a high standard. My father looked at him. My father, who had trusted him for years, who had praised him from a stage in front of the whole company. And my father said very quietly, Then explain the emails. Explain why complaints addressed to my office ended up back on your desk. Explain how you knew the names. Adrian had no answer for that, because there was no innocent answer. Adrian still did not know who I was. He tried to fight. Of course he did. Men like him always do. He said the women were working together against him. He said they were bitter. He said they simply could not meet his high standards, and now they were ganging up to punish a successful man for his success. My mother let him finish every word, and then she said, "We have one more witness." The door opened. I walked in, but I was not wearing the trainee's lanyard anymore. I did not sit in the seat of a junior employee. I walked to the table and I took the chair reserved for the family's shareholders. My father half rose out of his seat. "Ava," he said. His voice cracked on my name. He had known I was somewhere in the company. He had not known I was here, in the middle of this, at the very centre of it. I set two things down on the table, side by side. My employee badge, the one that said Ava Bennett, and a corporate record that carried my real name. Ava Hart. Then I looked at Adrian and I watched the truth finally arrive on his face. I said, "You were right about one thing. I walked into your department without understanding how power really works here." I said, "It took you 6 weeks to teach me." And then I said the thing I had come all this way to say. I said, "You did not target the CEO's daughter. You never knew that is who I was. You targeted a new trainee, a young woman you believed no one on this earth would ever protect. Here is the part that matters most, the part I need you to truly understand. I did not use my identity to prove that I was telling the truth. The evidence had already done that. The 7 women had done that. The timeline on the wall had done that. I used my identity to prove something far worse, to prove that Adrian would have done all of it to anyone, that his one and only test for choosing a victim was whether he believed she had nobody standing behind her. He picked women he thought were powerless, and this time, by pure accident, he had picked the one woman in the entire building whose last name could turn the lights on. I told him one more thing. I said, "You called 7 women difficult. You called them oversensitive or unqualified or just not a culture fit. And do you know the only thing all 7 of them ever truly had in common? It was not their attitude. It was not their work. It was that at some point every single one of them looked at you and said no. That was the whole crime. That was the entire pattern. Say yes and doors opened. Say no and your career quietly died in a file only you were allowed to read. 7 women. One word. The same punishment every single time." I watched that land. I watched him understand at last that there was no charm left anywhere in the world that could talk his way out of a room that already knew. The trap was never my identity. The trap was his own pattern, and he had walked into it willingly every single day for years. My mother did not fire Adrian in that room. That is not how she works. She is far more precise than that. Instead, she read out a series of decisions that the board had already approved in advance before Adrian ever walked through the door. Adrian was suspended immediately, pending an independent investigation. Elaine had her access revoked and was suspended for interfering with employee complaints. Every personnel file belonging to a woman who had ever left Adrian's department was reopened, and the old settlement agreements, the papers those women had signed on their way out the door, would not be used to stop them from cooperating with the investigation. Their silence had been bought once. It would not be honoured now. And then my mother said the hardest part of all. Richard Hart, the chief executive, my father, would step back from the investigation entirely. Because of the family conflict, yes, but also because of his own failure, his failure to see, his failure to build a company where the truth could reach him without needing a special last name. The most satisfying moment of that entire day was not watching Adrian be escorted out by security. Though that did happen, it was this. He had walked into that room to be handed the second most powerful job in the whole company, and he walked out having personally testified on the record to a panel that everything was perfectly fine. His own confident, smiling presentation had become the clearest possible proof that he had lied to the board. My mother said one last thing to him before he left. "I have never seen a room go so completely still." She said, "You built your career by choosing women you thought no one would believe. Your final mistake was choosing the one who made us go back and look at every woman before her. The independent investigation confirmed everything. Multiple cases of harassment, retaliation against the women who dared to say no, falsified performance records. Adrian was fired for all of it, for harassing employees, for abusing his power over probation, for punishing the people who refused him, for altering performance files, and for hiding the family conflict that had protected him for so long. Elaine was fired too, for blocking complaints, for interfering with the chief executive's calendar, for revealing the names of the people who reported, for accessing personnel files she had no right to touch, and for feeding false information to the leadership she was supposed to serve. But I did not let the story end there. I could not, because there was one more person who had to answer for what had happened, and he was the person I loved most in the world. My father tried to say that he had not known, and it was true. He had not known. I told him that not knowing did not make him innocent. I said, "You built a door that only one person held the key to, and then you decided that everything on the other side of that door must be fine, simply because you could not hear it." He was quiet for a very long time. And then my father did something I will always respect him for. He did not defend himself. He apologized, publicly, to the whole company, to every woman who had been failed, and he stepped down from the role of chief executive while the company rebuilt the way it listened to its own people. My mother stepped in to lead the board's oversight of the reforms, but she did not hand me a title. She did not put me in a corner office as a reward. She made me finish my rotation exactly like everyone else, because the entire point had been that the company should be safe for people who are not the boss's daughter. It would have made a mockery of all of it if I had used that moment to become the one exception. So I went back to work. Nina stayed. That mattered to me more than almost anything else in the world. For a while, I was afraid she would leave the moment it was over, that the damage was already done, that she would never trust the place again. But when the reforms went into effect and she saw that the man who had made her feel worthless was gone, and that the system which had protected him was gone right along with him, something in her straightened back up. She got her clients back. Her reviews, the real ones, the honest ones, showed exactly what everyone who worked with her had always known. She was good. She had always been good. The only thing that had ever made her look otherwise was a man who punished her for saying no. A year later, Nina was mentoring new hires herself, doing it the right way. Out in the open, on the record, asking for nothing in return. I watched her become, for a frightened new employee, the person that no one had ever been for her, and I thought, this is what winning actually looks like, not revenge. This. 6 months later, I was offered a place in the Real Management program, not because of my name, because of my work. I said yes, but I asked to keep the name Bennett for a while longer. I was not ready yet to be a Hart on that floor. I wanted to keep seeing the company the way it looked to everyone who was not born into it. And the company was different now. Complaints no longer travel up through a single trusted person. They go to an independent office, far outside the reach of any one manager. The chief executive secretary can no longer touch personnel concerns at all. Any change to an employee's review after that employee has made a report is automatically flagged and audited. Private after-hours mentoring has to be scheduled on the record with a clear and protected right to say no. And no manager can single-handedly decide whether the person who reported him passes probation. We did not just remove one bad man. We removed the machine that had protected him. It was not a clean, instant fairy tale. Rebuilding trust in a place where people had learned to stay silent takes time. In the first weeks after the changes, almost no one used the new independent reporting office. People had been trained by years of hard experience to believe that speaking up cost you everything. You cannot undo that with a single memo, but slowly it began to change. Someone reported a small thing, and nothing bad happened to them. Word got around. Then someone reported a bigger thing, and it was actually handled fairly, without the person's name being whispered back to the very manager they had reported. Word got around about that too. Trust does not come back all at once. It comes back one story at a time. One person who took the risk and lived to tell about it, and then another, and then another. That is how a culture actually changes. Not with a speech from a stage, with proof repeated over and over until people finally let themselves believe it is real. One morning, months after all of it was over, an email landed in my inbox. It was from a new employee, a young woman I had never met. She wrote, "I just reported a manager." And this time, no one asked me what I did to make him misunderstand. I read that one line 3 times, and then I sat back in my chair, and for the first time in that whole long story, I let myself cry. Because that single sentence was everything. That was the entire point. That was the company I had gone looking for on my very first day and never found. I had finally helped build it. I walked into my father's company to learn its culture. Here is what I learned instead. The first thing, Culture is not what a chief executive says on a stage. It is not the poster in the lobby or the speech at the annual meeting. Culture is what actually happens to a person when they are afraid and no one important is watching. The second thing, a good leader who never hears the truth can still build a dangerous place. Being a good person at the top is not enough, not even close. If the only path to your desk runs through one locked door, then you do not run the company. Whoever holds that key does. And the third thing, the one I carry with me every single day, a company is not safe because its leader is kind. A company is safe when the person with the least power in the entire building can say the word no out loud and know that they will still be standing there tomorrow, even when nobody important is in the room, especially then. Thank you for staying with this story all the way to the end. If Ava's story moved you, if you have ever been the person by the coffee machine that everyone talked over, or the person who was told they must have done something to be treated that way, then I want you to hear this. You were never the problem, and you are not alone. This is Office Storylines. We tell these stories because too many of them happen in real life, in real offices, to real people who are told to stay quiet. If you believe that the person with the least power in the room still deserves to be heard, then subscribe, turn on notifications, and become part of this. Every subscriber is one more person who refuses to look away. And tell me in the comments, have you ever watched a workplace protect the wrong person? Have you ever found the courage to say no when it cost you something real? Your story might be the exact one that helps someone else find their voice. And one gentle, important note before you go. If anything in this story felt too familiar, if you are dealing with harassment or retaliation where you work, please know that help exists. You can reach out to a trusted person outside of work, a qualified employment lawyer, or a confidential workplace support or harassment helpline in your country. You do not have to document it alone, and you do not have to decide what to do alone. Speaking with someone who understands the process can change everything. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next story.